This past year has had a lot of open world games. Cyberpunk, Horizon Forbidden West, Ghostwire Tokyo, Halo Infinite, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Gotham Knights, the list goes on and on. At face value, I'm pleased to see such an impressive line of variety. The only problem is that when it comes to new ideas, they bring nothing to the table.
Placeholder introduction. Alright.
With publishers demanding projects that are out of scope of the developer's resources, they have successfully normalized the worst things an open world game can be: repetitive, empty, and unfinished. Bayonetta 3 was almost an open world game this year, and thank God it wasn't. For as cool as the game is, the larger set pieces have nothing to do in them. The action and the characters in the game are great, but it's between those moments where the game starts to drag. It just sucks to watch a game spend all this time showing off, only for you to realize that what it's showing off is something you've seen 1,000 times before. I don't think enough game studios are embarrassed enough by how bland their genre-defining titles end up being. I remember when Death Stranding was marketed as an experience that was going to change the way we view character and interaction. Meanwhile, we have better character development and platforming coming from a game about a cat. I feel for these developers though. It's easy to tell if a game has an interesting story or atmosphere, but there are very few ways to actually communicate a title's technical gameplay and whether or not that's going to resonate with people. For instance, in everyone's least favorite 3D Mario, you can only move in 8 directions. The camera is fixed, and Nintendo traded the freedom of movement and exploration for a more controlled, straightforward level design. And that all makes sense until you realize that also describes everyone's favorite 3D Mario game. It takes an incredible amount of confidence to sit a player down from your idea and mechanic and say, no, this is all we're doing today. But it still must be done. The good news is that most of the games that came out this year already have revolutionary mechanics. Halo Infinite went open world this year, and the game is fine, but what's far more fun is the way they introduced the grappling hook. It's fun and smooth and completely changes the pace of everything. And what would be great is if they built a tight linear campaign that takes advantage of this mechanic instead of this lazy Halo 5 retcon story they have you running through the single player now. Don't get me wrong, the game is great, I just think they could have had something really special if they decided to take a larger risk. And it's this lack of risk that's destroying the genre. I was just playing High on Life, and it's a very standard first-person shooter with a clear focus on narrative and improvisational bits. I wish the developers spent more time using this narrative theme of subversiveness and applied it to the gameplay and not just the writing. Otherwise, the game doesn't stand out as anything more than another episode of Solar Opposites or Rick and Morty. But for all I have to say about the game, it's still a triumph. At least they executed their own idea. At least I never felt like a playtester. Developers are out here bragging about how they're making games with thousands of planets. Meanwhile, we can't even get games about Earth to work right. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and Pokemon Arceus came out the same year, but people are still defending Scarvo and blaming the Switch hardware because we as a society are doomed to fail. I feel like I'm watching every game studio go through the same thing Warner Brothers went through with DC. They wanted to compete with the biggest ideas without establishing any foundation. So regardless of how spectacular the visuals or how many planets you can fit in your game, it's not going to create a lasting impression because the entire thing is built on ideas that were meant to be marketable and not engaging. And it's tough because all of the games I mentioned today have really special moments that make them feel unique. Too often I feel like these titles are trying to recreate a certain magic rather than finding the fun in their own franchise. Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, Pokemon Arceus. These developers knew fundamentally what the game was and they built the world around it. And that's why they're instant classics. Gotham Knights isn't classic. It's just ass. But a tight one nonetheless. Tango, what was your favorite game this year? Interesting.